All right. There we go. So we are now on the record. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for your attendance to the third and final fall spotlight on the equity research of the Washington Road Usage Charge Assessment. I'd like to start as usual with quick introduction. So I'm going to read down the participant panel that I have in front of me, which names tend to move around, so I'll try and make sure I catch everyone. So please, Travis Dunn, CDM Smith, Consultant Project Manager for the project, but I'd like to invite everyone to say good morning, and I'll start with Representative Clyburn.
Good morning, former Representative Clyburn.
Former. And next I have Henry.
Hi, Henry Yates with Yates Consulting. Happy to be here today.
Representative Orcutt.
Representative Ed Orcutt, 20th District, South Thurston, Moose of Lewis, East Cowlitz, and unincorporated North Clark.
Allegra.
Allegra Calder with Burke Consulting. Nice to see everyone.
Kurt.
Kurt Augustine with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Good morning.
Linda.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Kennedy, working with Yates Consulting.
Commissioner Jennings.
Roy Jennings, Commissioner with the Commission.
Senator Fortunato.
Senator Phil Fortunato, 31st District. Still have Edgewood, but we added Milton if the new maps are approved. And then we go right down 410, which is Sumner, Bonnie Lake, Buckley, Enumclaw. And I haven't seen the real final thing, but I think Crystal Mountain and Sunrise are still in my district, and South Auburn, south of Route 18.
Great. Tom Hinkson.
Morning, Tom Hinkson with Everett Transit, representing the Washington State Transit Association.
Anna.
Good morning, Anna Leasing, Governor Inslee's Senior Energy Policy Advisor.
Annalise.
Good morning, I'm Annalise and I'm with CDM Smith.
Baxter.
Good morning, Baxter Shandyville with CDM Smith.
Anthony. Anthony's iPhone.
Good morning, Travis Anthony Buckley with WashDOT.
Doug.
Good morning, Doug Vaughn, TOT.
Chloe.
Good morning, Chloe Kinsey with Burke Consulting.
Fred. Fred Wade from DOL. Mute is activated, so we'll move on to Haiping.
Sorry about that. Fred Wade, licensing.
Oh, great. Thank you, Fred. Haiping.
Haiping Zhang, Department of Licensing.
Commissioner Cerebrin.
Hi, it's Hester Cerebrin, she, her pronouns, and I'm with the commission, and I apologize, I also have to leave a little bit early.
Jeff Doyle.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Jeff Doyle with CDM Smith.
Jennifer Harris.
Hi, Jennifer Harris. I'm staff to the House Transportation Committee.
Commissioner Fukai.
Good morning, everyone. Kelly Fukai, Commissioner from Spokane County.
Matthew.
Matthew Dorfin with the CDM Smith project team.
Representative Ramos.
Rep. Bill Ramos from the 5th District, which is the eastern rural part of King County.
Roshini.
Morning, everyone. Roshini Durand with CDM Smith.
Sadiq.
Good morning, all. Sadiq Simmons, Department of Licensing.
Mike Villeneuve.
Mike Villeneuve, Federal Highways, Washington Division.
And Yonel.
Good morning, Yonel Gardis with CDM Smith.
Terrific. I think that's everyone. If anyone is in attendance who I missed who would like to say good morning, please unmute and say hello.
Sharon Nelson, former Utilities and Transportation Commission Chair.
I'm so sorry, Nelson. Sharon, thank you. I
And
must have skipped right
lifelong
over it.
member of this committee.
How could I forget? Well, thank you again, everybody. Great attendance today, as we've had all along with these spotlights. Appreciate your endurance. This is the last one, and then we will meet as a full steering committee on December 13th. So we have a number of presenters today. I'm going to start with a very brief update on the financial analysis of distributional impacts of road usage charging. Then I'm going to hand it over to Henry and Linda, who will talk through the main part of this effort on equity analysis, which was the outreach effort to go out and meet with folks in the communities that were identified in the legislation and understand their issues and concerns about road usage charging. After that, I'll hand it over to Roshini and Baxter, who will talk about the pilot concepts that specifically emerged from this research, which are just concepts at this stage, and we'll present them a little bit more fully formed at the December steering committee meeting. So your feedback today would be very helpful for us as we work toward that December meeting. So with that, I will turn now briefly to just a quick update / refresher on the analysis that Allegra Calder and her team at Burke led on the financial impacts of road usage charging across different income levels. And two key takeaways from this analysis, both of which you've heard before, but the second of which we have a slight update. So the first key takeaway is that transportation taxes are a small proportion of household expenditures. We know that transportation as a percentage of household expenditures for low-income households is actually quite high, about 40% of income for the lowest income groups. But when you break that out into the component costs that make up transportation expenditures, the fuel tax piece of that is about 4% of that 40%, which is about 1.5% of the average low-income household's income devoted to that tax expenditure. It is higher than it is for higher income households, as are most household expenditures. The second key finding, which we had presented as inconclusive, was the question of how would a switch from fuel taxation to per mile charging affect households by income. The data we had previously were based on the National Household Travel Survey, which had a pretty small sample of households in Washington. And so the results were inconclusive as to whether there was a significant difference in either direction. We tried to take a closer look by examining the MPG ratings of every vehicle in the state of Washington. So I want to thank DOL for their help in sourcing that data, which we were able to decode and organize it by census tract. So here we saw a clear and statistically significant trend, which is that the higher the household income among these census tracts, the higher the vehicle MPG. And what that means basically is that low income households on average are paying more in fuel tax per mile driven than higher income households. So you can see on the right-hand column on this slide, for every 10,000 miles driven, households in the sub $50,000 household income bracket, that is census tracts that have average household income below $50,000, on average are paying $247. And that number declines with each income bracket all the way down to the class of household or census tracts with household incomes above $150,000 on average, paying about $219, which is a difference of $28. If you were to imagine a road usage charge at 2.4 cents per mile, the number would be $240 for each of these income brackets. So a slight decline for the lower income households and increase for the higher income households on average. So we presented that finding earlier as it wasn't a finding, it was an observation that the data did not support a conclusion either way. Now we have a better source of more comprehensive vehicle data that can support that conclusion. So with that as a brief update on the financial analysis, which you already heard a comprehensive presentation on in spring, and we have published a report on it, I will now turn it over to Henry and Linda to present the bigger part of this effort, which was the outreach activities. So Henry, invite you and Linda to turn on your cameras, come off mute, and take it away.
Okay, is my camera off? I'm not
I'm
You
not sure.
are live.
I am live. Fantastic. My system is not cooperating this morning, unfortunately. But anyway, Henry Yates with Yates Consulting and part of this team. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. You will be hearing from my colleague Linda Kennedy here shortly. And what we intend to do is recap the equity activity that we have been engaged in over the last several months. And before we do that, I want to remind you of the proviso that was attached to your directive on this issue. We were to identify and measure potential disparate impacts of RUC to communities of color, low-income households, displaced communities, and vulnerable populations through targeted outreach and engagement. Most of that work has occurred through focus groups. And as you can see here, we used a series of focus groups, as I just mentioned. We also intend to conduct pretty broad-ranging surveys and have one-on-one interviews to wrap all this up, along with a few additional focus groups. So first off, who did we meet with? We conducted, just so you know, most of our focus groups in person. We did a good number of virtual focus groups, but we got to know these folks pretty well. We used these various criteria for our focus groups, and we'll use it for our talking one-on-one with folks as well as our surveys. You see the racial and ethnic diversity, geographic balance. We have been to the eastern and central part of the state, although not to the extent that we want. We included persons with disabilities. We talked with the folks from Disability Rights Washington. We included refugee and immigrant populations. We are about ready to conduct a focus group that will include professional driver communities. And just so you know, our focus groups were anywhere from 4 to 12 individuals each, although most of them were in the 8 to 10 person range. So why don't we move on to focus group participants. As you can see here, we did talk with a pretty broad-ranging group of individuals. You see the organizations listed below. I mentioned Disability Rights Washington. We did a couple of focus groups in Eastern Washington, mostly with Latino audiences. We are scheduled to do a couple other focus groups in the eastern part of the state that I'll talk about later. There is one group that's not mentioned. We're still compiling the information, and that is the Me Centro group, which is in the Pierce County area. I should mention that, actually, why don't we move to the next section. So there is a analysis here, or a chart that talks about the participants of the groups, broken down by age and sex. We did ask questions of them. We'll talk about that a little later. That would give us basic information about who they are, occupation, age, sex, et cetera. We have a fairly substantial amount of non-reported there. You know, all of this was self-reported, and some people did not fill out the forms to the extent that they should have. And we do intend to follow up with them, so that non-reported will be significantly reduced in the future. As I mentioned, we're doing follow-up to get additional answers. But I think you can see there on this slide, as well as the previous slide, you see we're kind of moving around here, that we sought to include as many people from as many areas as possible. You see our racial and ethnic breakdown here. It's important to note that especially with the Hispanic or Latino population, there were a lot of people, actually most people reported that they were a couple of different races, and so they are represented there in the more than one race or ethnicity. Some did not report at all, not just from the Hispanic group, but from other groups as well, and we intend to follow up with those folks as well. So that's an important point. On to the next slide, where we talk about household income, household size. As you can see, we have household incomes ranging from under $50,000 to over $100,000. We had a good cross section of people that joined us. House cleaners to college professors. It was pretty interesting. Everybody was a valuable addition to this. Household size, again, you know, we had large households, small households in fairly even distribution. Why don't we move on to the next slide? So, you know, we ask folks about their vehicles. We do believe that that is an important point to kind of figure out what people are driving. Interestingly enough, of all the folks that we talked to, and we spoke with over 120 people, no one drove an electric vehicle. But you can see there we have the age of the vehicle, and a lot of people with no vehicles. All of those people, just so you know, that had no vehicle were part of the Disability Rights Washington group. On to the next slide. Focus group participants. You see a couple of charts there, which are interesting. Most people driving for work and school. I do have to mention that some people commented that their recreation and leisure driving would be significantly greater if it wasn't for the pandemic. So these numbers are a bit skewed based on the pandemic. You also see the miles driven per week, and you know, there were different numbers here. I will have to say that the two Eastern Washington focus groups that we were a part of, they were more in the higher range in terms of their driving. So let me next talk a bit about the findings, what we heard, which is kind of the meat of what we're doing here. We'll go on to actually, what I'm going to do here is turn this over to my colleague, Linda Kennedy, as I mentioned before, and she'll talk about the questions that we asked and some of the findings that we came across. Linda?
Thanks, Henry, and good morning. We asked a little information about all of the people who were in the focus group. This helped us know who was in the group, and we asked the easy questions first. It kind of smoothed the way for the questions that came later. We wanted to know their driving habits. We wanted to know how much they paid in gas tax, if they knew. It's pretty interesting. And we also asked what they knew about a road usage charge in Washington or other states before they were invited to be part of the focus group. We asked how much they paid yearly in gas tax, but our most important and most interesting question, we thought, was the last one, which was, how can the state mitigate any perceived unfairness? That provided us just a plethora of information and answers. It was a very, very interesting question and answers. We also wanted to know how participants would want to report the number of miles they had driven, and that's on this next slide. The slide shows that many people wanted a device attached to their car. That's the easiest solution. But those who chose other reporting methods were mostly concerned that somebody would know where they went and when they went there, and they did not want to be tracked. So the next slide shows how we talked about how to pay. And 23 respondents said that they wanted a phone app and pay monthly. Though some people were concerned that not every car owner had a smartphone. And so that was of some concern. A close second, as you see, was the lump sum option. That's the one with the unlimited miles. Some people were concerned that, well, yeah, I can drive unlimited miles, but what if I don't drive enough miles to make up for this lump sum? So that was a concern. And paying with your car tab payment was also a pretty popular idea. But again, there was concern that when you get your bill for your tabs, then you have this road usage charge bill on top of that. And for some people that seemed onerous. And so the monthly option was what they chose. Discussions, and this, interestingly enough, discussions with both the higher and the lower income groups seem to prefer the lower or the monthly payments as a favorite. Now, many of the participants were not sure how the roads were paid for in this state. A lot of people weren't sure about that. They wanted a baseline. We wanted a baseline for how familiar they were. More than 50% were unfamiliar or they didn't respond at all. They offered guesses like the federal government, the state government, city, taxes, car tabs, and tolls. Those were often cited. Now, the estimates on what they actually paid in gas tax, that was very surprising. You can see on this next slide that the guesses ranged from less than $50 all the way up to more than $1,000, and a couple people went beyond that and even into $5,000. They seem to think that what they're paying is a lot of money. You can see that most of them thought that it was a lot of money. And those who didn't know or weren't sure, of course, that's the larger group, the largest of all of them. But the number of people, 16% of our group thought that it was more than $1,000. And of course, 13% just didn't even answer the question. And with that, I'll pass it back to Henry for conclusions. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the summary of the comments that we received. Linda already talked about some of those. Let me just go through several of the key comments that we received. It's important to note that we are only representing, I don't know, maybe a tenth of the comments that we actually did receive. I do want to say before I get into this that there was substantial interest among the people that we talked to in this topic. Everyone, with the exception of one individual out of the 100+ we talked to, indicated that they wanted to follow up. They would like to know more about this, and that they were very interested in what might or might not happen on this score with RUC in the future. So I'll just go through these.
Henry,
yes.
Henry, can I interrupt you for a second? Because we have a question from Senator Fortunato.
Oh, no. Well, go ahead and finish up, Henry, and then with the summary and analyze. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go through this and then we'll have time for questions. Linda alluded to this, but there is a perception that RUC would be detrimental to low-income populations, and we have lots of suggestions from the folks that participated in the focus groups on how to level the playing field, so to speak. There was a kind of an interesting concern about what would happen if you didn't pay your RUC. That was interesting. There were people concerned once they understood that the gas tax revenues were declining. They were concerned and indicated that the advantage of a RUC would be to maintain upkeep of road and bridges, and the fact that the RUC would allow everyone, including folks that drive cars that don't use gas, to pay for for roadways. The Disability Rights Washington Group, they were strong about having transit funded through RUC. And then there was one individual who made the point that the state is incentivizing the burning of fossil fuels by having road and bridge construction funded through the gas tax. And when they said that, several other people in the room piped up and said that was a concern that they had as well. It's important, I think, to note that there was a wide variety of comments made about the RUC. There were some that were that knew about it previously, not a lot. There were others that had no sense at all about even how, as Linda pointed out, roads are in the state are paid for. And interestingly enough, there was a lot of confusion about whether we're talking about local roads or state roads and bridges, and we had to provide a lot of clarification in that regard. A comment was made that the set fee for unlimited mileage might be good to benefit folks in Eastern Washington. That came from individuals in the Yakima focus groups. There was definitely opposition to the idea of a RUC right off the bat when we started talking about it. People, I think, became a little more comfortable with it as we spoke about it, but it's important to note that I don't think there was 100% comfortability among the groups we talked to, because there just weren't enough details regarding what the proposal would be. Several people asked about whether or not the gas tax would be eliminated if there was a RUC. Several people talked about the fact that there are already a lot of taxes placed on folks in the state and nationally as well, and expressed concern about the RUC because it would be what they considered to be a new tax. Linda pointed out the support for paying monthly, huge support for that among all income groups. Again, we talked about how most respondents didn't know how bridge, road repair, maintenance was funded or new construction. Linda also pointed out the fact that most respondents didn't have a clue how much they paid in gas tax. I think we had one person saying that they paid $5,000 in gas tax, and regardless of how much we tried to convince them that that wasn't the case, they were intent on believing that they paid $5,000 a year in gas tax. So again, a need for additional education. I do want to say that we conducted a number of these focus groups, and we put a time limit of 1.5 hours on each one. Linda may remember an instance where we got through it in 1.5 hours, but regardless of how many people we had there, each focus group was at least 2 hours, and some of them went way longer than that. And in some cases, we had to cut off the discussion because people really wanted to talk about this. So let me move to what we intend to do as our next steps. I mentioned earlier that we have a couple of additional Eastern Washington focus groups. Oh, Senator, I'm sorry, I didn't see you waving your hand.
Right. Well, I did want to get some questions in based on some of that, your previous statements. Now, I'm not a big one on this. I don't understand the relevance of skin color to mileage tax, but that's the proviso, so I'll go with that. The monthly registration, as you know, I was working on a bill that said DOL creates a account. People can then just do a monthly payment into that account, and then when they go to register their car, that's when they pay it, and then they could access that account to see how much money was in there to pay, so that they didn't get stuck with a big bill. Kind of interesting that if you actually think about this, lower income people drive less fuel efficient cars, correct? That was a slide. Lower
That's
income.
correct.
people-
That's right. On average,
Right,
that's
okay.
correct. Yep.
So they drove less fuel efficient cars. So actually, if you gave them a gas tax credit towards their RUC, my belief is that they would not be paying very much more if the RUC was more. Whereas people with higher income or higher MPGs or even electric cars would be paying substantially more in a RUC. So that the fact that they're driving fuel inefficient cars actually helps balance the playing field when you're looking at gas tax versus RUC. That's just throwing that out there. I'm not sure that if we do some kind of offset for lower income people, less of a mileage charge, lower rate or something like that, and maybe others can offer, doesn't that violate the uniformity of taxation clause? So we have everybody's supposed to be paying the same. That's why income taxes have failed in the past. So that might be a consideration. However, I will say that to help offset the cost of lower income people, I also had a bill that exempted prepared food and clothes from sales tax, which would give a $2.4 billion tax break, 87% of which goes to lower income people. So maybe we could couple this RUC with my bill to exempt food and clothes to offset that. That's a plug. But thank you, Henry, for a very good presentation so far. Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
I do want to mention that there were several people in the group that did tie the RUC to the overall taxation situation in the state. So, people were definitely thinking about that. So why don't we move to the next step slide, unless there's other questions. As I mentioned, we intend to be back in Eastern Washington, actually specifically on December 4th. We have 2 focus groups scheduled in the Tri-Cities area. I don't know if they will be virtual or in person. We intend to have interviews with community leaders, and we will soon be sending out an electronic survey to groups. The electronic survey, I might mention, will ask the same questions that we ask in the focus group, so you'll have a lot more information to draw from when we make our December presentation. And then we intend to reach out to the participants that were part of the focus group, and also that will be filling out the survey to participate in the pilot efforts that will occur next year. Just very quickly, I should mention that there are a couple of people who some of you know pretty well that really helped us out here. While Linda and I relied very, very heavily on our personal connections to get the right groups sitting at the table talking with us about this issue, and we were pretty successful in that. We also called on a couple of people, one for members of the Asian community, Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos. She was fantastic in terms of bringing those folks, bringing many folks from that community together. And Lisa Vanderloo, who's the head of the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprise and is from Eastern Washington. She was helpful at connecting us with people in Eastern Washington Eastern and Central Washington who were able to help. We thought we were going to have a significant amount of translation here because, we were told a lot of folks didn't speak English as their first language. Interestingly enough, in the many focus groups that we did, we only had one instance where we had to have translation, and that was Neighborhood House and a Vietnamese group that we spoke with. Personally, Linda and I, we enjoyed getting to know, hopefully I'm speaking accurately for you, Linda, we enjoyed getting to know these folks, and several of them have actually followed up with us and asked questions about this. And one individual who really got into this, he wanted to have information about the analysis that had been done by by the bigger group, and so we sent them information on that. I will also have to say we got into a little, it wasn't a spat, but it was an interesting discussion where one of the group leaders for one of the organizations was chastising some of the older people for indicating in the age bracket that they were younger than they were. And then they chastised some of the younger people for indicating in the age bracket that they were older than they were. I just thought that was an interesting little factoid. And fortunately, we weren't in the middle of that, but it was quite a quite a little brouhaha. So I'll end there and take questions, and want to thank you for the opportunity to be engaged in this.
Henry and Linda, thank you very much for your work and your continuing work. I know we have a few more focus groups yet to come, as well as surveys. I'd like to invite any comments or questions, and while I'm waiting for hands to go up, we do have one more segment to this presentation, which will be our first take on how we translate some of these findings into possible pilot tests, which has been the theme of these spotlights. We're building concepts to test out next year, and I'll specifically mention it. The outreach effort has been illuminating, but also has helped us to jumpstart our effort to recruit volunteers to take part in these pilot tests. So the interest these folks have expressed in staying involved melds quite nicely with our desire as a research team to have volunteers willing to join this effort and tell us what they think of these different pilot concepts.
Well, I just want to say,
questions?
Travis, I just want to make a comment more than anything. I think it was really interesting, Henry, the feedback you got around the sort of education piece of this. And that's one thing I think we've talked a little bit about as a commission at several meetings as well, that is something that I think we really need to, it's not just for our low income or disadvantaged communities, it's for the general public as well. I know that some of the conversations I may have in rooms, the perception of what they pay for taxes or what the RUC might look like to them is often different than the reality may or may not be, right, as we explore this. So I think that that's really something that we need to take into consideration, that as we migrate in this direction, there is a significant amount of education that needs to be invested in as we roll this out, so that we're never going to get obviously everyone to understand out of the gate, and any change such as this, which is major, a completely different way of handling our road, our gas tax, is going to require just significant education. So I appreciate that is some feedback that you're hearing as you go out and engage with these groups. And I think we can apply it to the general population as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Fukai. Appreciate your comments. Senator Fortunato, I'm watching your comments in the chat. I don't know if you're asking for us to comment on your statement that lower income drivers have on average less fuel efficient cars and therefore pay more gas tax that would offset any RUC charge, other than to say, yes, that's correct. So in theory, if there was a RUC that was offset by the gas tax, the on average low income households would have a smaller differential to cover than higher income households. I think that's the correct takeaway.
Yeah, and thank you. Those are actually mostly stuff for your knowledge and edification, and also to be on the record.
Got it. Very good.
So
Thank
if you feel a need to comment for any of my things, that's great, as you just did. Very good. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Henry and Linda before we move on? Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll have a little bit more to say to wrap up the report out on this topic at the December meeting. But at this time, I'm going to invite Roshini and Baxter to be seen and heard and take us through 2 emerging pilot concepts related to this research for initial presentation today that we will delve into a little bit more deeply in December. Roshini?
Thank you, Travis. You could go to the next slide. Okay, so I am going to present 2 emerging pilot concepts, which both have to do with one pain point that Henry and Linda presented, the payment. So the first one, payment plans, is focused on testing what type of smaller incremental payments could be offered as an alternative to lump sum payments or higher, more infrequent payments. So these lump sum payments apply to RUC, but also generally to any fee that vehicle owners have to pay. It can be the vehicle registration fee or even the sales tax when people purchase a vehicle. This applies to it, but will be focused on RUC, of course. So this pilot idea could be focused on ideas to make it easier for some vehicle owners to comply with payment requirements and reduce risks of payment defaults so that states can reliably raise the revenues they need. The second one, which is targeted income-based discount. So we've seen through focus groups and conversations that with policymakers that there's interest in testing discounted rates based on income. I want to insist on the exploratory nature of this test. We heard what Senator Fortunato said on uniformity of taxation clause. So we're not coming in with a policy recommendation to offer discounts, but rather on recommendations to test concepts around discounts to attempt to answer a few questions, such as what eligibility criteria would need to establish so that a discount is simple and not costly to administer. Is a discount relevant at all? And if it is offered, who will notice? Is it relevant, meaning will it really help? And is it worth the operational complexity and cost? So that is really the intent of the test. Now, if we move to the next slide, I'll present something that may seem familiar to some of you. We presented this flow at the Innovation Spotlight. It's a simplified workflow which has what we call a streamlined process based on the vehicle registration system as an entry point for end users. So we talked about designing the simplest and less costly process for the state to administer as the default process, meaning the process we expect most people to choose. So this default process is based on annual mileage reporting and an annual payment of the road usage charges due. We then mentioned last time that for people who do not naturally opt for annual reporting or annual payment options, we would offer more flexibility around mileage reporting and payment plans. So the pilot concepts we're presenting today are really focused more on the payment aspect. So these are the yellow boxes that are at the bottom of the screen. On the next slide, yes, we present some payment options that we've seen, and we're presenting them across a spectrum. Options on the left here present lower revenue risk for states, but less flexibility for end users. And options on the right potentially present higher revenue risk with more flexibility for end users. And in the middle here, we listed a few options that we might explore in a pilot setting to try to balance the revenue risk for the state and flexibility for the end user. So I'll start explaining what we have at both extremes before we go to that box in the middle. So starting with the left side, lump sum payments. So this is typically what entities like DOL are set to support. As I mentioned earlier, they are the simplest and less costly to administer. State agencies can collect the amount due, and there's no need for reminders, follow-ups, or enforcement. We suspect that a fair number of users may opt for lump sum payments for simplicity. And we know that the problem with those lump sum payments is that they may be too hard for some people to pay. So for end users who cannot opt for these higher lump sum payments, there's an option to pay smaller periodic amounts. And that is what we see at the other extreme on the right, where we show flexible payments. So a little bit more about flexible payments. So if they're supported by state agencies, they might present a higher revenue risk for states for obvious reasons. just because states would have to follow up with end users and potentially resort to enforcement if payments are not collected. And this also means higher administrative cost. Now, if these flexible payments are supported by independent third parties that remit the full amount to states, full amount due to states, then those third parties, what they usually do is that they have independent contracts with the end user. The only problem with that is that the risk of payment is shifted to the end user, who may be subject potentially to higher credit card rates, for example. And we see some of those flexible options when we pay as consumers. For example, we have buy now, pay later options like PayPal that we see on consumer websites, when we go and buy something at online, at Amazon, for example. These are things that pop up on the screen. So end users usually have a few weeks to pay. First weeks are often offered at 0 interest, but if the consumer misses a payment deadline, penalty rates can go up to 25% or more, for example. And then, of course, another option that is kind of implicit that many people use are credit cards. So these are what would call implicit payment plans that are administered directly by credit card institutions. What we see is that an interest rate that is below 13% is deemed to be a good rate, but these interest rates fluctuate according to what people's credit scores are and payment terms. Obviously, state agencies have no control over this, but these are things that end users are exposed to and are available to them. So what a pilot could be about would be to explore what the sweet spot is and explore different payment options that can be based on some best practices that we've seen in the tolling agency, in the tolling area, or best practices that transit agencies often support. We've listed a few examples here to get started. We've seen wallet-based payments like what Good2Go offers, and we know that this has also been tested in RUC programs. So what happens there is that users top up their accounts regularly using various payment means, including cash. Then there could be other payment plans, flexible payment plans that are combined with financial management tips to help people stay on track. So this usually takes the form of a smartphone app that people can use and that can remind people with prompts that they have to pay and that they'll have an upcoming payment. And then we'll also see whether there can be some public-private partnerships to support payment plans with lower interest rates. So these are just a few options that we listed here to get started. The whole pilot concept that Baxter will unpack a little bit more is about trying to find out what people need and craft prototypes around payment plans that can be tested in a pilot setting. With that, I'll just pause to see if there are any questions. And if we don't have questions, I'll invite Baxter to jump in and present his slides.
Thank you, Rashini. I'll pause for a moment. Okay, so sort of in exploring this sweet spot, it might be a worthwhile exercise to test what the demand is for flexible payment plans generally. So how many people might take advantage of it, who could benefit from it, and how much it moves the needle for people in terms of easing the burden of a lump sum payment. So one concept our team has envisioned is a process in which we recruit Washington drivers, including some low-income drivers, to participate in a program where we collect some vehicle information and send them a mock invoice based on their estimated annual mileage and fuel consumption. And along with this mock invoice, we send a preloaded gift card and give them an option of repaying or paying this RUC bill in a lump sum. And we can also test payment plan options by offering installment options and seeing how many people use this option. And the idea here is to sort of simulate real payment behavior as close as we can. So participants would theoretically be free to use this gift card how they see fit. So for example, they could take the payment plan option and treat the gift card as a cash advance and repay the invoice in some other way, or not at all. And in fact, it might be a worthwhile exercise to see how many people would default on a payment plan. So in such a pilot, we'd like to test how many people would use it if it was made available to them. How many people would find the payment plan on their own? How many people default? Does a payment plan even move the needle for people in terms of easing the pain of a lump sum payment? And lastly, who ought to be eligible for a payment plan? So how is a low income driver defined? And next slide, please. And so a second possible concept, Roshini mentioned targeted discounts. So potentially working with DSHS and DOL to design a possible process for connecting income data to vehicle data and vehicle owner data, and identifying what the challenges are in this process, and assessing sort of the benefit for customer participation. In other words, is the discount valuable enough for it to be worth it for people to go through the extra pain of having to receive this discount? What's the process for them? And also, what's the administrative process on the DOL and DSHS end? So in other words, is the administrative cost worth the discount that it provides on RUC?
All right. Thank you, Baxter. I think that kind of wraps us up for the pilot concepts. We have a lot of extra time for discussion, feedback, questions, and answers. I just wanted to kind of recap that and zoom out a little bit. In December, you may recall, if you attended the earlier spotlight sessions, we had a number of other pilot concepts that have already been presented. I think we have about a dozen in all. So we will be recapping the recommended approaches to pilot testing at our December meeting for additional input and feedback. But any initial feedback you have on these two concepts that emerged from this aspect of our research today would be very, very helpful to the project team. Again, recognizing that these are at the conceptual level focused on the payment part of a road usage charge, both the nature of the payment and how it can be broken into smaller payments, as well as the concept of possibly offering targeted discounts and the operational requirements around that.
We have a question on the payment side of things. Have you guys looked at and explored sort of the concept that's similar to what our utilities do, where you have like a comfort level billing type situation? So you pay the same amount evenly across the months, and then there's a true up that happens every year.
We have it's been discussed. We haven't did not explicitly mention it today. I don't know, Roshini or Baxter, if you covered that in the research, but certainly it's within the realm of doable within this pilot concept. I don't know, Roshini, if you have anything to add to that.
These are things we explored at high level. I will say all those what do we call best practices can be rolled into what we call that prototype. Like, how can we craft a payment prototype around these comfort payments, for example, and test these with different type of users to see how they react to them and whether they are what people need. So definitely one of the things that we flagged as ideas to fall into that prototype. Yeah.
Sharon, I think I see your hand up, and then Senator Fortunato.
Yeah, I just follow up on that. Just have to remind us at the very beginning, we are worried about simplicity, the simplicity of the gas tax versus this thing that's going to be obviously more costly to the state to run. So concepts like, and I don't pretend to be an economist, but concepts like cost effectiveness versus cost efficiency, I'm sure you will report back to us if we do run pilots with these kinds of low income or discount programs, because the utilities certainly found that out. Administrative overhead just is administrative overhead. So thanks.
Thanks for the reminder. I always like to tell the story of my natural gas bill here in Texas, which is about $20 a month. About $1 of that is for the actual natural gas, and the other 19 is the customer charge for the service of being billed for that $1. So yeah, we definitely want to be mindful of administrative costs and overhead, and thank you for reminding us of that. I think just a quick comment on the process. As we go into the pilot test phase, we will be evaluating the pilots, connecting them back to those guiding principles that the steering committee adopted way back in 2012 and reaffirmed in 2016 prior to the first pilot, so that we can report back to all of you on how these concepts perform relative to those key principles. Senator.
So to dovetail with your Texas story, one time on the House floor, I said, I'm going to deposit this dime into the state treasury so the taxpayer know every last dime of their money hasn't been spent. Well, so when I made the deposit of a dime, I had to make a deposit of $2.50 to offset the cost of depositing the dime. And then I had to deposit another $2.50 to offset the cost of depositing the $2.50 to pay for the dime. So it wound up costing me $5 to deposit a dime. I've been obviously looking at this for a while, and it requires the DOL to be able to set up an account for each person on each car. So people would simply say, every month I'm going to send $25 a month into this account by bill pay or by credit card or whatever. So every month they might put 25, 50, whatever. And then when they register their car, we need to have the ability of the subagent to be able to check that DOL account to see how much money is in there and then apply it to the RUC. Or their we could say apply it to your registration or whatever if you choose, if you have too much money in there. And then when you went to sell your car, the car dealer has to have that same ability to check the DOL account to see how much is in there, to see if the guy was fudging all the while. It comes out when the guy goes to sell his car. So we need to take that into see how that works. So it's mostly how much is DOL going to need to adjust and program to be able to do that. Because no matter how you do this, I believe all the systems require DOL to come up with an individual account for everybody. And if DOL people could comment on that.
I'll filibuster for them for a second in case Sadiq or Fred or Haiping would like to comment, and I'll just segue by saying all of these concepts, but especially the ones that relate to payment plans, our intent is to work alongside DOL in developing these prototypes. We don't want to pilot anything. Let me put it a different way. We want the pilots to be useful learning experiences for everyone on the steering committee, of course, and the participants, but also for DOL, so that we can learn how they might actually be able to support these types of programs most effectively. So we're absolutely interested in having DOL's participation, as they have been all along in the research to date with the workshops we conducted in the fall, continuing into the pilot process. I don't know, Sadiq or Fred or Haiping, and I don't see Jill on the call, if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Yes, so just a point of clarification, the Department of Licensing already has an account for every vehicle owner. So every vehicle is associated, every registered vehicle has an account that is associated with it. So the complication is the mileage tracking and reporting and making allowances for low income vehicle owners and all those things. The devil is always in the details here. And I think from the research that's already been done, it sounds like it might be more cost effective to handle those externally to DOL, because we don't have the structure to support that part of it, that aspect of it right now.
Well, if I can DOL receive a payment from somebody of $25 a month and apply it to a particular vehicle? Now, if I send you $25 and I say, I want to apply this to my registration. Now, I'm assuming that DOL doesn't have the back end, the ability to see that and apply it to the registration. But does DOL currently have the ability for me to mail in $25 and have you recognize that as a contribution into a account?
No,
Okay, so we
No.
need to, right, so we need to have that mechanism in place that when somebody sends in 25 bucks, DOL has the ability to say, okay, we're gonna stick this in a road usage charge account. So,
that would certainly be an enhancement to the system.
right, okay, thank you.
I think another point just to reflect on that is in these pilots, we want to build them in a way that's sort of agnostic as to who's doing it, to leave open the possibility that could be DOL that takes in that payment and applies it to a vehicle account. Could also be a third party that takes in that payment and applies it to account. And I think the direction that you would ultimately want to take probably will be driven by customer experience and cost effectiveness. So we didn't presuppose either solution in crafting these pilot concepts. We want to be able to nail the operational moves that have to happen, and in doing that, understand what might be the most effective way to actually deploy it, whether that's directly with DOL or through a third-party combination. Any other questions for any of our presenters today or comments? If nobody has any other questions or comments, you're going to steal back 25 minutes of your day. I see Sharon likes that. I will put up the last slide just as a reminder. On December 13th, again via Zoom, we'll have the full steering committee meeting. It's 10 to 2:30 is the schedule. We will have recap presentations on all the spotlight sessions, as well as the financial analysis update that has been going on in the background. You haven't heard much about that yet, so you'll get a big update on that. And then, of course, the big event will be the presentation of our proposed pilot concepts for 2022 for your final feedback and adjustments. With that, I'll stay on the line in case folks have additional questions or comments, but otherwise, thank you once again for participating today actively and for all your comments and input throughout this journey, and look forward to seeing you on the 13th. You will be getting an email from probably Era Swanson inviting you to register and get a link for that meeting on your calendars. We'll do that one a little bit differently than we've been doing the spotlight sessions. That one will have a registration because it's a more formal steering committee meeting. So be on the lookout for that email in the next 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks.
Thanksgiving. Bye-bye. Bye.